Hey there friends, it's Missy again. Thanks so much for stopping in today. I'm back with a new layout and video for the Paige Evans design team. Yay! It feels so good to say that again. And I'm going to use the Bloom Street collection for this page, and I'm going to start with some of the washi tape. I have not used a lot of the washi tape. I don't think I've used any of these 4 rolls yet. And then I've got a lot of the pattern papers here. A lot of them I've cut into. And I was in the mood to do some punching, and for some reason I wanted to use a square. I hadn't used my square punches in a while, so I thought that I would start there. And I'm going to use the washi tape as pattern paper. So I'm just going to pull a couple strips of each of these 4 rolls and just stick it to some scrap white cardstock that I have. And I'm going to punch it out, and it's going to look like pattern paper. So this is one way, one of the many ways to use washi tape. You could of course stick it to the paper just like that and use it as is. So many ways. But yeah, we're going to punch today, and I think this turns out really cute. I'm going to wind up using several of the pattern papers to kind of mix and match with the washi tapes. I find that when you want to use a lot of patterns, it's good to use small shapes of all of those patterns, and so punches, little punches like this are really good for that. So yeah, all right, I got all the washi tapes punched out. Now I'm going to go through the pattern papers here, and I'm trying to figure out my color scheme. I've been on a rainbow kick. You guys, if you've followed any of my most recent layouts, yeah, I've gone over the top with the rainbows. So I thought that I would try not to do a rainbow layout. I still do use a lot of color on this one, but I wouldn't consider it a rainbow layout. I'm going to use the colors that you see there. I really love that soft purple color. This paper is almost used up, the yellow one there. I'm going to use this as my background. This is paper number 18, and I thought that this color would be a really pretty background color to kind of contrast with all of these pretty shapes. So to start this page, I'm just going to start to lay out the squares and try to figure out how I want to arrange them. I don't have a picture chosen yet, so I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. I'm just kind of playing around and seeing how all these colors and patterns look kind of all mixed around the page like that. And I'm liking how this is looking, but I'm not quite sure if this is going to be the final arrangement. I did decide that I wanted to use a pool photo, mainly because they have that really pretty blue in most of the photo, and I think it's going to be a nice contrast against all the other colors and pull some of that blue color from the blue washi tape squares. So before I do anything else, I'm going to add some white gesso to my pattern paper here, because I'm going to add some mixed media down kind of wherever you see the gesso going. I'm thinking kind of down the center of the page, and then kind of maybe going out a little bit to the sides, maybe like in a T shape. But the gesso is going to kind of fade out some of this coral color and those wonky crooked stripes on this paper. It's also going to act as a barrier between anything liquid that I add to the page. This is just regular pattern paper, so it is definitely not equipped to handle a bunch of water. So I'm going to continue to let that dry, and in the meantime I went through some of the papers that I've definitely already cut out of and tried to think of embellishments that I might want to use. And so I definitely wanted to use florals and some leaves, so I went and just started fussy cutting a few things out. These big flowers here are the same color as my background, so I knew that those would coordinate and they would look pretty up close to my photo, which is going to have a lot of blue in it. And yeah, so I just cut out those flowers and then thought, okay, my background's dry, let's get to creating that. And my first thing that I used was the Distress Oxides. I used those on my last layout for International Scrapbooking Day, and they react so different on this pattern paper than they do on white cardstock. On my other layout, I used white cardstock and clear gesso, and the colors were so vibrant, and I hardly even needed to use a lot of the color. And here we're using pattern paper that's colored with white gesso, and it's totally different. The colors, which I'm not using a lot of the Distress Oxide here, but you can kind of see I'm just lightly scraping it on and then using some water and a brush to activate it and spread it around the page. But it winds up kind of drying a lot lighter than I was anticipating, because these colors that I'm using are pretty bold. But I want the background to be on the lighter side because I don't want it to blend in with all those squares. I know I've said this a lot about backgrounds, but I always want my backgrounds to enhance the papers and the photo that are on top of it, because, you know, this is the background. And so I want it to be visible and I want it to be pretty, but I don't want it to overshadow everything else. So I'm adding just a little bit at a time to see what it's going to look like, if it's going to be too much or, you know, not enough. So I kind of let that dry, and it was way too light. So I'm coming back in with the colors again. I'm just trying to pick colors that I have from my stash that coordinate with all those squares, and I'm trying to get the blue color that's going to match my pool photo. But yeah, this is one of my favorite things to do with the Distress Oxides. On my last layout, I stamped with them and it worked perfectly. And then when I want to make a background like this, I'll just scrape the pad right onto the background and then use the water to activate it. And, you know, the gesso works wonders when you want to spread and blend your paints and your colors like this, and just let them kind of run and blend together and kind of bleed out. The gesso is what is allowing that to happen on top of this pattern paper. Because if I would not have added the gesso, first of all, since the pattern paper is colored, the Distress Oxides would look a totally different color. But the gesso kind of acts as white, and so the colors stay truer to you know, what they actually are. And then it allows the color to stay a little bit wet longer, so it can kind of do its thing. Now, when it dried, it was just still a little bit too light, so I thought I would add in some more layers of color. I pulled out shimmers, which, you know, I love me some shimmers, in coordinating colors. I've got Cotton Candy, Mustard Seed, Oh Say Can You See, no, not Oh Say Can You See, Well Blew Me Down, and Seize the Day. And these look way darker than I wanted, but they're going to dry a little bit lighter because I'm going to soften them up with some water and kind of blend it out and do a little bit of dabbing up with a paper towel. Because I do want the colors to match, but like I said, I just don't want the background to be so bold, especially when I'm going to put all those little squares on top of this. I want all these colors to be visible in between all of the squares, because I'm not going to have the squares touching each other. I'm going to have a little bit of space, kind of creating a grid. So I want all this color to show through it and around the edges of it. But, you know, if it's the exact same color, the squares might get lost, and then it would just be way too busy and too bright, if that makes sense. It makes sense in my mind. That's kind of what I'm thinking as I'm making this layout. And you can see where the color is pooling into the little valleys because the paper is warping, even with the gesso. Like I said, it's just pattern paper, and so yeah. All right, so I let it dry and I flattened it out overnight as best I could. I laid big heavy paper pads on top of it, and it did flatten it out a lot compared to how it was looking. So I'm gonna ruffle up the edges of all the squares with my little edge distressor there, and then I'm gonna come back and redesign where all the squares are gonna go. And you can kind of see what I'm talking about here with the background. It's still what I consider very colorful, but it's still on the softer side. I don't feel like it's darker or louder than the squares. I think it's gonna enhance the squares and, you know, just play off all the colors that I've got going on here. Sorry about the glare on the photo there. I forgot to move my lamp over. I am going to wind up changing my picture. It's still going to be a pool photo. It's just going to be a different one, and you'll see why when I get to that point. But this is kind of the idea that I've got going here. I'm going to have the photo over to the right and then embellish around the photo. I don't want to cover up too many of the squares because that's kind of the whole design idea behind the background. So a little bit of it might get covered up, but not a lot. I want to use different size flowers. I want to bring in pops of the darker hot pink color, so I'm going to fussy cut a couple more of those out from one of the other pattern papers that's got the most gorgeous flowers on it. And then I'm going to start to glue down the first strip of the squares. And I've got my T-square ruler there because I want these to be lined up perfectly straight. If I'm trying to make a perfectly straight grid, then I definitely need to use a ruler to help line that up, because there's no way I can make a straight line just eyeballing it. So that's where I'm going to start, and then I'm going to glue down the rest of them kind of in a wonky grid, I guess you could say, and I really like how that's looking. So I'm going to add some splatters around and using the same shimmers colors that I used on the background. And you can see what I mean here, what I was saying about the background, peeking through the squares and around the squares, and just giving the background some interest and not being a flat color. All right, so then I got the wild idea to add white splatters. I feel like anytime I have a lot of darker colors that would show white splatters well, I like to add it on there, and I love that effect. It's just watered down white acrylic paint. That's all that is, and when it dries, you can definitely see the white. All right, here's the picture that I changed out. I decided I wanted a square for my photo, not a rectangle, because I've got a bunch of squares going on. So I thought I got the perfect little opening there for a square. So I went back through my pictures and found one that was more suited to a square pattern. But then I realized I was covering up the prettiest part of his background, which is that pink and yellow section right there. So I felt like I needed to add some more peeking out from around the photo so you could still see some yellow and pink. But I feel like that's the best spot for the picture. I'm not covering up any of the squares, and I have the perfect opening for it. And yeah, the picture is going to be straight. Usually my pictures are crooked. You know, that's just the way the layout turns out. But since I've got all the squares perfectly straight, I'm going to have the picture straight. I let everything dry, I took a break, and then I decided I needed to do some stitching. So I got out my white thread and my sewing machine and just did some straight stitching up and down on all the rows, and then sideways on all the rows. And then I'm going to kind of try to curl up some of the edges of these squares just to give them a little bit of texture and dimension, which I love. I really love how this background is looking. I feel like it's different, it's fun, and it's not a rainbow. I can't believe it. You know, I don't know. I attempt to make layouts all the time that aren't rainbow, but then it just happens, and the rainbow takes over, and before you know it, I've used all the colors, and I'm never mad about it, because who doesn't love a rainbow, right? All right, so I'm going to get to work on the picture. I'm just adding a little bit of white tissue paper there to give it a little bit of a subtle border around the edges. And then I'm going to pop it up off the page with some adhesive foam there. Since the squares are flat and sewn down, I want something on the page to kind of be raised up just for some variations in dimension. And the adhesive foam is great for that. And then I'm going to come in with all those flowers that I fussy cut earlier and just kind of play around and see where they should go, what looks okay. I don't want things to look too busy on top of the squares, and so I try to keep overlapping on the squares to a minimum. I play around with some of these layered butterfly stickers. And also one of the challenges that I was facing at this point was color. Finding the right color of the right thing to put in the right spot. Because a lot of the things that I was trying to embellish with either blended into the background too much or it clashed. Meaning I felt like I was running into things that maybe were too patterned. Since the background is patterned enough, I need more embellishments that are solid in color. Like these flowers, I wouldn't really call those patterned because, you know, they're basically either all peach or all pink. That one there is more on the purple side. They're not really patterned. Whereas all of the squares have little teeny tiny patterns. So does that make sense? Okay, another example. That purple butterfly is a good embellishment for that section right there because it's a solid color purple and it kind of stands out. And I put it on an area that was mostly yellow and blue and hot pink. I didn't want to put a purple butterfly on top of a purple square. So, and it also helps that it's a butterfly and its wings kind of stand up off the page. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I felt like since this was a pull photo, I needed a sunshine. And so I fussy cut that one out from another one of the pattern papers. I'm going to use that. I'm not quite sure where it's going to go yet, but it matches. It's yellow. And I think it's really cute when it finally finds a home. And then I found more purple butterflies, which was the color that I was wanting. I'm going to fussy cut those from pattern paper and glue those in a couple spots around the page. And again, they're more on the what I would call the solid color. They're not overly patterned and won't clash with the background. All right, we're going to come in with some thread finally. I'm going to wind some yellow thread into a big circle and loop it around behind where the sun is going to go. And I guess the sun is going to go right there because I just glued it down. I'm going to glue down these butterflies and make sure the wings are able to roll up and kind of bend like they are real and they just landed on the page. And then I'm going to add a bit of purple thread on both sides of the picture, kind of coming out from underneath those flowers. And I cut that big flower in half because I didn't want to waste the half that was hiding underneath the picture. So I can use the other half somewhere else. And you would never know that it was a flower that was cut in half. So if you have a big embellishment like that and you're only going to see half of it, you might as well cut the other half off and use it in another spot. More thread over to the right. I didn't want to layer too many of the flowers on top of the picture, so I'm only going to overlap the two flowers over there on the right, and I'm not going to do that on the left. I want that blue water to really show. And then I'm going to cut the scallops off of one of the ephemera die cuts, and I'm going to use that little You Are My Sunshine piece up at the top. And that's pretty much the only crooked thing. I kind of tucked that under at a little bit of an angle. And then some of the cardstock stickers, that one up at the top says So Much Fun, and I like that it's just a little bit of a darker shade than the background. And then I wind up not using this. I cut this cardstock sticker that says Love This. I just couldn't find the right spot for it, so it went back into my stash for another layout. I did some fussy cutting. I cut out Live Life. I struggled with the title for this layout. I could not figure out what I wanted it to say, if I wanted it to be small or big or what. So I wind up using these puffy word stickers. I wanted to use beautiful, but it was too long of a word for what I was wanting in the space down there kind of underneath the picture. So I mix and match beautiful and dreamy, and I just create the word beauty. And I'm going to use white because it's subtle. It's not something that's going to overpower all the colors. And then I'm going to use that Live Life that I just cut out from that die cut. Even though beauty, Live Life doesn't really make sense, I'm thinking beauty is the actual title, and then Live Life is just sort of a little secondary sentiment there. And I'm going to add a little tiny pink floral cluster underneath it there. And the Live Life is actually that dark navy blue color that's in the washi tape in some of those squares that I used. And so that kind of pulls that darker color over to that side of the page. And I like mixing and matching fonts. Beauty is, you know, just a basic separate font, and then Live Life is a scripty cursive type of font, which I love. And we're almost done. We're almost done. I'm going to add in my journaling lines using a pencil and then my metallic gold pen because I didn't want to use black. I wanted to keep it kind of light. But anyway, there's the final page. I love how this turned out. I'm glad that I changed the photo to a square. And yeah, this was just something fun and random. I don't even know what made me want to use squares. I tend to go for my circle punches more than anything, but I was just trying to think of something that I hadn't done in a while. Every time I start a new layout, I always try to think of, you know, what's something I haven't done in a while. And I don't know, squares was the answer for this, but here are all the details. You can see all the different textures and colors and all the little bits and pieces that go into it that's hard to see until you get the close-up shots. But anyway, let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.